The betrayal hit me like a freight train on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one my late husband Clarence had reupholstered for me just before he passed, sipping my morning coffee and reading the newspaper when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see my daughter-in-law Patricia's perfectly manicured fingers tapping impatiently against her designer purse, flanked by two official-looking men in dark suits. My name is Rosalind Blackwood, and at 78 years old, I thought I'd seen every form of human cruelty. I was wrong. "Mom, Rosalind," Patricia said with that fake sweetness she'd perfected over the years. "We need to talk." Behind her stood my son Marcus, avoiding my eyes like a guilty child, and Dr. Henderson, whom I recognized from the medical practice downtown. The third man introduced himself as Mr. Garrett from Elder Care Services. The next 30 minutes unfolded like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Patricia produced a thick folder of documents, spreading them across my mahogany dining table. With the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence, medical reports I'd never seen, psychological evaluations I'd never agreed to, and sworn statements from neighbors claiming I'd been acting confused and unsafe. "Mrs. Blackwood," Dr. Henderson said in that condescending tone doctors use when they think you're senile, "your family is concerned about your well-being. These incidents of forgetfulness, the confusion about dates and appointments—" "What incidents?" I demanded, my voice sharp as a blade. "I haven't had any appointments with you, and I certainly haven't been confused about anything." Patricia leaned forward, crocodile tears glistening in her eyes. "Mom, last week you called Marcus at 3 a.m. asking where Clarence was. You seemed genuinely surprised when he reminded you that Dad passed away 2 years ago." The lie hit me like a physical blow. I had never made such a call. Clarence's death was seared into my memory with painful clarity. Every detail of that awful day when I found him in his workshop, his heart finally giving out after 79. Years of faithful service. I could never forget that he was gone. "That's not true," I said firmly, but I could see the doubt creeping into Mr. Garrett's eyes as he made notes in his folder. Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, we just want what's best for you. Sunny Meadows is a beautiful facility. You'll have round-the-clock care, activities, people your own age to socialize with." "I don't need round-the-clock care." I stood up, my hands trembling with rage rather than age. "I drive myself to the grocery store. I manage my own finances. I cook my own meals. There's nothing wrong with me." But the paperwork was already prepared. The signatures already witnessed. The legal mechanisms already in motion. Somehow, in the space of a few weeks that I'd been completely unaware of, my own family had constructed an elaborate web of lies and false documentation to have me declared mentally incompetent. The most devastating revelation came when Mr. Garrett opened his briefcase and withdrew a power of attorney document, signed by me, except I'd never signed it. The signature was close, practiced, but not quite right. Someone had been forging my name. "This gives Marcus and Patricia the authority to make medical and financial decisions on your behalf," Mr. Garrett explained, as if he were discussing the weather. "The court has reviewed all the evidence and determined that immediate placement is in your best interest." "What court?" I demanded. "I was never notified of any court proceedings." Patricia's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "The family court hearing was last Thursday, Mom. You were served with papers, but according to the process server, you seemed confused and couldn't understand what they were for." Another lie. I had been home all day Thursday, working in my garden and preparing for my weekly bridge game with the neighborhood ladies' club. No one had served me with any papers. The truth began to crystallize with horrible clarity. This wasn't about my well-being or my safety. This was about money. Specifically, the $200,000 inheritance I'd received from my sister Eleanor's estate 6 months ago, along with the equity in the house that Clarence and I had paid off decades ago. Patricia had been asking increasingly pointed questions about my estate planning and suggesting I should simplify my finances for months. "I won't go," I said, crossing my arms. "You can't force me to leave my own home." Dr. Henderson cleared, his throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm afraid the court order is quite clear. If you refuse to cooperate voluntarily, we're authorized to proceed with an involuntary commitment." The words hit me like ice water. Involuntary commitment. They could actually force me out of my home, away from everything I'd built over nearly 8 decades of life, based on lies and forged documents. "I need to call my attorney," I said, reaching for my phone. Patricia was faster, placing her hand over mine with surprising strength. "Mom, your attorney, Mr. Patterson, is out of town for 2 weeks. We've already checked. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." But I had secrets they didn't know about. While Patricia had been busy orchestrating her elaborate deception, I had been making preparations of my own. 3 months ago, disturbed by her increasingly intrusive questions about my finances and her subtle suggestions that I was becoming forgetful, I had quietly taken steps to protect myself. The first step had been hiring a private investigator named Jake Morrison, a former police detective who specialized in elder abuse cases. I'd paid him cash to document everything: my daily routines, my mental acuity, my physical health, and most importantly, any unusual activity around my property or finances. Jake had been watching, photographing, and recording for weeks. The second step had been changing my will and establishing a trust that Patricia and Marcus knew nothing about. My real attorney, not the out-of-town Mr. Patterson they'd mentioned, had helped me create a legal fortress around my assets that would be activated the moment anyone tried to have me declared incompetent. The third step had been installing hidden security cameras throughout my house and property, cameras so small and well-concealed that even professional burglars would have trouble finding them. Everything that was happening right now, every lie, every forged document, every moment of this orchestrated betrayal, was being recorded in high definition. But perhaps most importantly, I had activated what Clarence used to call my nuclear option, a dead man's switch built into my financial arrangements that would trigger a very unpleasant surprise for anyone who tried to steal from me. "All right," I said finally, my voice steady and calm. "If you're going to force me to leave my home based on lies and forged documents, I suppose I have no choice. But know this, you have no idea what you've just set in motion." Patricia smiled, triumphantly, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Marcus looked relieved, as if he'd been holding his breath. Dr. Henderson and Mr. Garrett began packing up their papers, eager to complete their distasteful task. As they waited for me to pack a small bag, "Just essentials, Mom. We'll bring you anything else you need later." I made my way slowly upstairs to my bedroom, but instead of packing clothes, I opened my jewelry box and removed a small device that looked like an antique brooch. With one press of a hidden button, I activated a sequence of events that would destroy my son and daughter-in-law more thoroughly than they could possibly imagine. The ride to Sunny Meadows Assisted Living felt like a funeral procession. I sat in the back of Marcus's BMW, watching my neighborhood disappear through the tinted windows, saying goodbye to the life I'd built over nearly 4 decades in that house. Patricia chatted cheerfully about the facility's amenities, the beautiful gardens, the craft room, the weekly entertainment, as if she were describing a vacation resort rather than the prison where she intended to warehouse me while she looted my life savings. What they didn't know was that within hours of my voluntary admission to Sunny Meadows, a very different kind of paperwork would be filed in probate court. Documents that would expose their entire conspiracy and trigger consequences they never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Sunny Meadows smelled like industrial disinfectant and defeat. The moment I stepped through those sliding glass doors, I understood why they called places like this God's waiting room. The lobby was decorated in that particular shade of beige. That's supposed to be calming but just makes everything look like it's already dead. "Mrs. Blackwood, welcome." A woman in scrubs bounded toward us with the kind of aggressive cheerfulness that made my teeth ache. Her name tag read Brandy, with a little smiley face dotting the I. "I'm the admissions coordinator. We're so excited to have you join our family." Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth, considering the real family that had just thrown me away like last week's garbage. Patricia was in full performance mode, playing the concerned daughter-in-law for our audience. "We just want Mom to be safe and happy," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "It breaks our hearts to see her struggling at home alone." I wanted to slap that fake concern right off her surgically enhanced face. Instead, I smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, don't you worry about me, dear. I've always been good at adapting to new situations." The threat in my voice was subtle, but Patricia caught it. Her smile flickered for just a second. The tour was a masterclass in institutional cheerfulness. Brandy showed us the dining hall where residents sat staring blankly at their pureed meals, the activity room where a handful of people were half-heartedly working on a jigsaw puzzle, and the beautiful gardens, which consisted of some sad flowers, planted around a concrete patio. "And here's your room." Brandy threw open the door to what looked like a slightly upscale hospital room. 2 single beds, 2 small dressers, and a bathroom I'd have to share with whatever poor soul they assigned, as my roommate. The window looked out onto the parking lot. "It's perfect," Patricia gushed. "So much safer than that big old house with all those stairs." The big old house where I'd raised 3 children, buried a husband, and lived independently for 78 years. The house I'd just been kidnapped from by my own family. After Patricia and Marcus left, Patricia with more fake tears, Marcus with obvious relief, I sat on the narrow bed and let the rage wash over me. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger that makes you scream and throw things. The cold, calculating kind that makes you dangerous. My roommate arrived an hour later. Her name was Doris Chen, and she was 92 years old with eyes sharp as broken glass. She took one look at me and said, "Let me guess. Family dumped you here to get at your money?" "Is it that obvious?" "Honey, I've been here 3 years. I've seen every kind of family betrayal you can imagine." She sat heavily on her bed, her walker clattering against the nightstand. "My grandson promised he'd just handle my finances temporarily while I recovered from my hip surgery. That was in 2021. Haven't seen a dime of my pension since." "Why don't you leave?" Doris laughed, but there was no humor in it. "With what money? And where would I go? They've got us trapped, and they know it." That night, lying in the dark, listening to Doris's labored breathing and the endless sounds of the night shift, call buttons, medication carts, someone crying in the distance, I thought about Clarence. He used to say that the measure of a person wasn't how they acted when everything was going their way, but how they fought back when everything fell apart. Well, everything had definitely fallen apart. But Patricia and Marcus had made one crucial mistake. They thought I was just another helpless old woman who'd roll over and accept her fate. They had no idea that their confused and forgetful mother-in-law had been planning for this exact scenario for months. The next morning, I was sitting in the dining hall picking at something that might have been scrambled eggs when a young woman in a business suit approached my table. She was Asian, maybe 35, with intelligent eyes and the kind of confident bearing that comes from never having been underestimated. "Mrs. Blackwood? I'm Sarah Kim, your attorney." Patricia had been right about one thing. My old attorney, Mr. Patterson, was out of town. But what she didn't know was that 6 months ago, I'd hired Sarah Kim from the law firm of Kim, Rodriguez and Associates. Sarah specialized in elder law and had a reputation for destroying families who tried to abuse their elderly relatives. "I got your message," Sarah said quietly, sliding into the chair across from me. The message I'd sent using the coded system. We'd established months ago. A simple text from my cell phone that Patricia hadn't thought to confiscate yet. "How bad is it?" I asked. Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Bad, but not unfixable. They've been busy little bees. The power of attorney document is a forgery, but a good one. Someone spent time practicing your signature. The medical reports are mostly fabricated. Dr. Henderson has been filing false documentation claiming you've been his patient for months, when there's no record of you ever visiting his office. And the court hearing? Also a sham. They got a temporary order from Judge Williams. Coincidentally, Marcus plays golf with Williams every Saturday. No one expected you to have legal representation or to fight back." Sarah smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. They're about to learn how wrong they were. Over the next hour, Sarah outlined what we'd discovered during the months of investigation. I'd paid for. Patricia and Marcus hadn't just been planning to steal my inheritance. They'd been stealing from me all along. Small amounts at first, cleverly disguised as helping with expenses or managing investments. But the amounts had grown larger as my sister Eleanor's death approached, and they realized a substantial inheritance was coming. The private investigator found evidence of them meeting with the administrator here at Sunny Meadows 3 weeks ago, Sarah continued. They've already put a down payment on a condo in Florida using money they transferred from your savings account without authorization. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. It was one thing to know your family saw you as an obstacle to their financial goals. It was another to discover they'd been systematically robbing you for months while smiling to your face and calling you Mom. "What's our next move?" I asked. Sarah's smile turned predatory. "Tomorrow morning we're filing a motion to have you released from this facility and to have all the fraudulent paperwork thrown out. We're also filing criminal charges against Patricia, Marcus, and Dr. Henderson for elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. And then," she paused dramatically, "we're going to activate that trust you set up." Ah yes, the trust. My secret weapon. 3 months ago, when I first began to suspect what Patricia and Marcus were planning, Sarah had helped me establish something called an asset protection trust. On paper, it looked like I'd simply reorganized my finances for tax purposes. In reality, I'd created a legal fortress that would protect my money and simultaneously destroy anyone who tried to steal it. The beauty of the trust was its trigger mechanism. The moment someone tried to have me declared incompetent or gain unauthorized access to my accounts, it would automatically activate a series of consequences that would make Patricia and Marcus wish they'd never been born. "How long before they realize what's happening?" I asked. "They probably already know something's wrong," Sarah said. "The trust company sent them notice this morning that all access to your accounts has been suspended pending investigation. They're probably trying to call you right now." As if on cue, my cell phone buzzed with an incoming call. Patricia's name flashed on the screen. "Should I answer it?" "Absolutely," Sarah said. "But put it on speaker. This should be entertaining." I swiped to accept the call. "Hello, Patricia." "Mom!" Patricia's voice was higher than usual, strained with barely concealed panic. "We just got the strangest call from your bank. They're saying there's some kind of problem with your accounts." "Oh, my," I said innocently. "What kind of problem?" "They won't tell us. They just keep saying that access has been restricted, and we need to speak with some attorney we've never heard of." "Mom, this is really important. Did you do something with your money?" I looked across the table at Sarah, who was grinning like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "Patricia, dear," I said sweetly, "I think you're about to discover that your confused, forgetful mother-in-law isn't quite as helpless as you thought." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long I thought Patricia might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped to a whisper. "What do you mean, Mom?" "I mean," I said, savoring every word, "that while you were busy forging my signature and bribing doctors to declare me incompetent, I was busy protecting myself from exactly this kind of betrayal. Mom, you're not making sense. You're confused again. I'm not confused, Patricia. I'm furious. The words came out harder than I'd intended, cutting through her fake concern like a knife. I know about the money you've been stealing. I know about the forged power of attorney. I know about your little meetings with Dr. Henderson and this nursing home. I know everything. Another long pause. When Patricia spoke again, the fake sweetness was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. You can't prove anything. Can't. I smiled at Sarah, who pulled out her phone and started recording. Tell me, Patricia, how did you explain to the Florida real estate agent where you got the money for that condo down payment? The one you made using funds transferred from my savings account 3 days ago? The sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. They thought they'd been so clever, so careful. They had no idea I'd been watching them for months. That was Marcus handling your investments. We were trying to diversify your portfolio. Into beachfront property in your name? I laughed, and even I was surprised by how bitter it sounded. Sarah, dear, would you like to explain to Patricia what happens when you steal from someone who's prepared for it? Sarah leaned toward the phone. Mrs. Matthews, this is Sarah Kim. From Kim, Rodriguez and Associates. I represent Mrs. Blackwood. As of this morning, we've filed motions with the court to have your fraudulent guardianship petition dismissed and to have Mrs. Blackwood immediately released from Sunny Meadows. We've also filed criminal charges against you, your husband, and Dr. Henderson for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and theft. The phone went so quiet, I could hear Patricia's breathing. Additionally, Sarah continued, the Asset Protection Trust that Mrs. Blackwood established 3 months ago has been activated. This means that not only are your unauthorized transactions being reversed, but you're now personally liable for treble damages under the Elder Abuse Prevention Act. The trust is seeking to recover 3 times the amount you stole, plus attorney's fees, plus punitive damages. This is insane, Patricia finally stammered. She's a confused old woman who doesn't know what she's doing. Actually, said a new voice, Mrs. Blackwood seems remarkably lucid to me. I looked up to see a man in his 50s approaching our table. He was wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. Behind him walked 2 people in uniforms, a sheriff's deputy and someone from Adult Protective Services. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Detective Jake Morrison. We spoke several months ago. My private investigator. The man who'd been documenting everything while Patricia and Marcus thought they were being so clever. Detective Morrison has some interesting evidence to share, Sarah said into the phone, which was still connected to Patricia's increasingly panicked breathing. Jake pulled out a tablet and set it on the table. The screen showed security footage from inside my house, footage of Patricia and Marcus searching through my desk, photographing documents and having hushed conversations about getting the old bat out of the way. This is from the cameras. Mrs. Blackwood had installed throughout her property, Jake explained. We have hours of footage showing Mr. and Mrs. Matthews going through her personal belongings, copying financial documents, and practicing forging her signature. On the phone, Patricia made a sound like a wounded animal. But my personal favorite, Jake continued, swiping to a new video. Is this recording from yesterday morning? The screen showed Patricia and Marcus in their car outside my house, talking excitedly about how they'd finally gotten the old bitch out of the way and calculating how quickly they could access my accounts. Patricia, I said sweetly into the phone, are you still there? You recorded us? That's illegal. Actually, it's not, Sarah said. Mrs. Blackwood has every right to install security cameras on her own property. And since you were conspiring to commit crimes against her, the recordings are perfectly admissible in court. The Adult Protective Services worker, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, spoke up. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Linda Rodriguez from APS. Based on the evidence we've reviewed, It's clear that you've been the victim of financial abuse and fraudulent commitment. We're here to facilitate your immediate release from this facility." "What about the court order?" I asked. "Judge Williams has recused himself from the case due to conflict of interest," Sarah said with obvious satisfaction. "The emergency hearing is scheduled for this afternoon before Judge Martinez. She's reviewed our motion and the evidence, and let's say she's very interested in how this happened." Through the phone, I could hear Patricia crying. Real tears this time, not the fake ones she'd been using to manipulate people for years. "Mom, please," she sobbed. "We can work this out. We're family." "No," I said quietly. "Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't forge documents and lie to doctors and judges. Family doesn't throw their elderly relatives into nursing homes like garbage just to get at their money." "But where will you go? You can't live alone anymore." "Says who? The doctor you bribed to write false reports? The son who was too much of a coward to even look me in the eye while you were destroying my life?" I stood up from the table, feeling stronger than I had in months. "I'm 78 years old, not dead. I can take care of myself just fine." Detective Morrison closed his tablet. "Mrs. Matthews, I need to inform you that warrants have been issued for your arrest and your husband's arrest. I'd recommend you turn yourselves in rather than making us come find you." The line went dead. Patricia had hung up. Linda Rodriguez smiled at me. "Mrs. Blackwood, let's get you out of here." As we walked through the lobby of Sunny Meadows, past the residents sitting in their chairs like forgotten furniture, I thought about Doris back in the room we'd shared for exactly one night. I stopped at the reception desk. "I'd like to make a phone call," I told Brandy, who was looking very confused by the parade of officials escorting me out. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm not sure what's happening here, but—" "What's happening," Linda Rodriguez interrupted, "is that Mrs. Blackwood was fraudulently committed to this facility, and your administration failed to verify the legitimacy of the paperwork before accepting her. I'd recommend you review your admission procedures before my department decides to investigate this place more thoroughly." Brandy's aggressive cheerfulness deflated like a punctured balloon. I dialed the number I'd memorized from the business card Sarah had given me months ago. When the voice answered, I smiled. "Kim, Rodriguez and Associates, this is Rosalind Blackwood. I'd like to retain your services for my roommate, Doris Chen. Her grandson has been stealing her pension, and I think it's time someone fought back for her too." As we walked out of Sunny Meadows and into the afternoon sunshine, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not just for myself, but for all the forgotten, discarded elderly people warehoused in places like this while their families looted their life savings. Patricia and Marcus thought they were so smart, so modern, taking advantage of a confused old woman. What they didn't understand was that I'd been fighting battles longer than they'd been alive, and I'd learned long ago that the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's getting even, and I was just getting started. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Judge Martinez's courtroom watching my son lie under oath. He was wearing his best suit, the navy one I'd bought him for his law school graduation, and speaking in that smooth, professional voice he used with juries. "Your Honor, my mother has always been eccentric. Paranoid, really. She's convinced that everyone is out to get her money. The security cameras, the private investigators, the elaborate financial schemes. This is the behavior of someone who's lost touch with reality." I wanted to stand up and scream, but Sarah had coached me well. "Let him hang himself," she'd whispered. "The evidence speaks louder than his lies." Dr. Torres had already testified, declaring me completely competent and describing Marcus and Patricia's actions as a textbook case of financial elder abuse. The private investigator had presented hours of recorded evidence. The bank manager had testified about the unauthorized transfers. Even Judge Williams had been called to explain his golf course justice. But Marcus kept talking, painting me as a confused old woman who'd somehow orchestrated an elaborate fantasy to punish her loving family. She's always resented Patricia, he continued. Jealous, maybe, of a younger woman. This whole conspiracy theory is just her way of getting revenge for imagined slights. Judge Martinez looked skeptical. She was a small woman with steel gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Matthews, are you suggesting that your mother forged bank records, bribed court officials, and convinced multiple professionals to lie on her behalf? I'm suggesting that my mother is a very wealthy woman who can afford to buy whatever story she wants people to tell. That's when Sarah stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to present one final piece of evidence. She walked to the prosecution table and picked up a tablet. This is security footage from October 1st, 3 weeks before Mrs. Blackwood was committed. It shows Mr. Matthews and his wife in Mrs. Blackwood's home while she was at her weekly bridge game. The courtroom fell silent as the video played on the large screen. There was Marcus, going through my filing cabinet, photographing documents. There was Patricia, practicing my signature on a notepad. And there, clear as day, was the conversation we'd all been waiting for. Once we get her declared incompetent, we can liquidate everything, Marcus's voice echoed through the courtroom. The house alone is worth $300,000, plus the inheritance money. What if she fights it? Patricia's voice asked. She's 78 years old. Who's going to believe her over us? The silence that followed was deafening. I watched the color drain from Marcus's face as he realized what he'd just heard. His own words, his own voice, destroying his carefully constructed lies. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Mr. Matthews, you were saying something about your mother's paranoid fantasies? The rest of the hearing was a formality. Judge Martinez voided all the fraudulent documents, dismissed the incompetency petition, and ordered full restitution of the stolen funds. She also recommended that the district attorney pursue the maximum penalties for elder abuse. Mrs. Blackwood, the judge said as we prepared to leave, I want to commend you for your courage in fighting back against this abuse. Too many elderly victims never get justice. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. The story had captured public attention, the savvy grandmother who'd outwitted her greedy family. Sarah handled most of the questions, but one reporter called out directly to me. Mrs. Blackwood, what would you say to other elderly people who might be facing similar abuse? I stopped walking and turned to face the cameras. I'd say don't let anyone convince you that being old means being helpless. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And remember, you have rights, you have value, and you deserve to be treated with dignity no matter how old you are. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. But even with the legal victory, the real work was just beginning. My house was still destroyed. My family was gone. And I was facing the reality of starting over at 78 years old. The insurance covered most of the damage, but there were things that couldn't be replaced. The photo of Clarence and me, on our wedding day, torn in half. The quilt my mother had made, shredded beyond repair. The wooden jewelry box my father had carved for me when I was 12, smashed to pieces. I spent hours going through the wreckage, salvaging what I could. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson from next door, came over with coffee and homemade cookies. I'm so sorry, Rosalind, she said, looking around at the destruction. I should have known something was wrong when I saw them going in and out of your house while you were gone. It's not your fault, Helen. They fooled a lot of people. What are you going to do now? It was a good question. I could rebuild, I could move, I could do anything I wanted. For the first time in decades, I was completely free to make my own choices without considering anyone else's needs or opinions. That evening, I was sitting in Clarence's workshop, or what was left of it, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. Through the window, I saw a familiar figure getting out of a beat-up Honda Civic. Mrs. Blackwood? It was Doris Chen, my former roommate from Sunny Meadows. She was leaning heavily on her walker, but her eyes were bright with determination. I hope you don't mind me coming by. Doris, how did you get here? I called that lawyer of yours. Turns out my grandson wasn't as smart as he thought he was. We got my money back, all of it, plus damages. I'm out of that place for good. I helped her into the house, clearing a path through the debris. Where are you living now? That's actually why I'm here. She settled carefully into one of the few unbroken chairs. I've got enough money to get my own place again. But the thing is, I got used to having someone to talk to. Someone who understands what it's like to be written off by your own family. I understood what she was asking. The house felt enormous, now empty in ways that had nothing to do with the physical damage. The silence was oppressive, filled with memories of laughter and conversation from decades past. Are you suggesting we become roommates? I'm suggesting we become family, Doris said firmly. The kind of family that actually cares about each other. I looked around at the broken remnants of my old life. Maybe it was time to build something new. Something better. I think that sounds perfect. The next morning, I called Sarah with a new plan. Instead of simply rebuilding my house, I wanted to turn it into something bigger. A safe haven for elderly people who'd been abandoned or abused by their families. A place where people like Doris and me could live with dignity and support each other. It's a beautiful idea, Sarah said, but the legal complications will be enormous. Zoning laws, health department regulations, licensing requirements. Then we'll figure it out, I said. I've got time, money, and a very good lawyer. What? I didn't tell Sarah was that I'd been thinking about this since my night at Sunny Meadows. All those forgotten people, warehoused and ignored while their families looted their life savings. There had to be a better way. Marcus and Patricia had tried to destroy me, but they'd actually given me something precious, purpose, a reason to use my remaining years for something meaningful. The irony was perfect. In trying to steal my money, they'd helped me figure out the best possible way to spend it. 6 months later, I was standing in my front yard at 6 a.m, watching city inspectors tear apart my dreams with clipboards and measuring tapes. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this structure isn't up to code for a group residential facility, the lead inspector said, not sounding sorry at all. His name was Rick Morrison, no relation to my private investigator, and he had the kind of mustache that men grow when they want to look important. You'd need fire suppression systems, wheelchair accessibility modifications, commercial-grade kitchen equipment. We're talking about a complete rebuild. I clutched my coffee mug tighter, feeling the morning chill seep through my robe. Behind me, Doris was making breakfast for the 3 other women who'd moved in over the past few months. We weren't officially anything yet, just friends sharing a house, but word had spread through the elderly community. Women who'd been abandoned, cheated, forgotten. They found their way to my door like wounded birds. How much? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Rick flipped through his papers, calculations scribbled in the margins. 200 grand minimum. Maybe more once we get into the electrical and plumbing, and that's assuming you can get the zoning variance approved. My inheritance. Every penny of it. Gone before we even got started. There's another problem, Rick continued, oblivious to the fact that he was destroying my world one regulation at a time. Your neighbors have filed a complaint. They're saying this violates the residential character of the neighborhood. I turned to look at the house next door, where Helen Henderson lived. We'd been friends for 15 years, had shared countless cups of coffee and worried about each other's gardens. Now her kitchen window was covered with a closed blind, and she wouldn't meet my eyes when we passed on the street. What kind of complaint? Noise, traffic, concerns about property values. Standard stuff when people try to change residential to commercial use. He closed his folder with a snap that sounded like a coffin lid. I'll have the full report to you by Friday. You've got 30 days to bring everything up to code or cease operations. Operations. as if 4 elderly women sharing meals and companionship was some kind of industrial enterprise. After the inspectors left, I sat on my front porch and let the tears come. Not the dignified, silent tears of disappointment, but the ugly, gasping sobs of someone whose last hope was slipping away. I was 79 years old, and I was failing at the one thing I'd thought I could do right. "Rosalind?" Doris's voice came from behind me. "Honey, what's wrong?" I couldn't speak, just handed her the inspection report and watched her face fall as she read it. $200,000, she whispered, plus the zoning fight. "I'm sorry." The words came out in a croak. "I thought I could make this work. I thought I was smarter than this." Doris lowered herself carefully onto the porch step beside me. At 93, she moved like every joint ached, but her mind was sharp as ever. "You know what your problem is?" "What?" "You're trying to do this alone." Before I could ask what she meant, a car pulled into my driveway, then another and another. Within 10 minutes, my front yard was filled with people I recognized but hadn't expected to see. Sarah Kim got out of the first car, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of expression that meant she was ready for war. Behind her came Detective Morrison, Helen Rodriguez from Adult Protective Services, and Dr. Torres. But the biggest surprise was the last car. Judge Martinez stepped out, dressed in jeans and a sweater instead of her judicial robes. "Mrs. Blackwood, I hope you don't mind us dropping by unannounced." I wiped my eyes with my sleeve, feeling like a child caught crying. "Judge Martinez, What are you doing here?" "We heard about your troubles with the city inspectors," Sarah said, setting her briefcase down on the porch. "Seems like someone's been making phone calls, stirring up opposition to your project." "Who?" Detective Morrison pulled out his phone and showed me a recording app. "We got a tip about someone offering money to neighbors if they'd file complaints against you. Want to guess who's been making those calls?" My stomach sank. "Patricia. She's been busy since she got out on bail," he confirmed. "Calling city officials, neighborhood associations, anyone who'd listen. Trying to make your life difficult even from a jail cell." Judge Martinez sat down on my other side, making my small porch feel crowded but somehow safer. "Mrs. Blackwood, what you're trying to do here, it's important work. We see too many elderly people with nowhere to go, no one to advocate for them. But you can't fight City Hall alone." "I don't have a choice. The inspection report says—" "The inspection report is wrong," Sarah interrupted. "Rick Morrison is Helen's cousin, by the way. Helen Henderson, your neighbor who's been avoiding you. She asked him to be extra thorough in his inspection." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Helen, who'd brought me casseroles when Clarence died. Helen, who'd borrowed my ladder and my hedge trimmers and never brought them back. Helen, who'd apparently decided that property values were more important than friendship. "But even if he's being vindictive," I said, "the regulations are real. I can't afford to renovate the whole house." "What if you didn't have to?" The new voice came from someone I hadn't noticed before. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of practical clothes that suggested she was used to getting things done. "I'm Margaret Sinclair," she said, extending her hand. "I run the Riverside Community Foundation. We fund innovative approaches to senior housing." I shook her hand numbly. "I don't understand." "Your story made the news, Mrs. Blackwood, not just the court case, but what you're trying to build here. We've been looking for someone with the vision and determination to pioneer a new model of elder care. Someone who understands that the current system is broken." She opened a folder and pulled out official-looking documents. "We'd like to offer you a partnership. The foundation would handle the renovation costs, the zoning battles, the regulatory compliance. You'd maintain control of the day-to-day operations, but you wouldn't have to fight alone." I stared at the papers, afraid to hope. "Why would you do this?" "Because what happened to you happens to thousands of elderly people every year," Judge Martinez said quietly. Most of them don't have the resources or the fight to push back. But if we can create a model that works here, we can replicate it elsewhere. Dr. Torres leaned forward. Mrs. Blackwood, in my evaluation of you, I noted something unusual. You weren't just a victim who fought back. You were someone who turned trauma into purpose. That's rare, and it's exactly what this kind of project needs. Sarah pulled out her own folder. The Foundation's lawyers have already researched the zoning issues. There's precedent for this kind of facility. And as for Rick Morrison's inspection, report. She smiled grimly. Let's just say a second opinion might be in order. I looked around at all these faces, professionals who'd somehow become invested in my crazy dream. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Doris said from beside me. Say yes to help. Say yes to not doing this alone. Say yes to showing people, like Patricia and Marcus, that they didn't break you. They made you stronger. Through the blur of tears I couldn't stop, I managed to nod. Yes. As the group began discussing next steps, architectural plans, legal strategies, funding timelines, I found myself thinking about something Clarence used to say. He believed that sometimes the worst things that happen to you end up leading to the best things you ever do. Patricia and Marcus had tried to destroy me by putting me in that nursing home. Instead, they'd shown me exactly what needed to be changed about how we treat our elderly. They'd turned me into an advocate when I'd planned to be a victim. But as I watched Margaret Sinclair sketch renovation plans on the back of an envelope, I realized they'd done something else too. They'd taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most. And right now my front porch was full of family. The phone call came at 3 a.m, 3 weeks before our official opening. I fumbled for the receiver in the dark, my heart already racing the way it does when you're old enough to know that calls at this hour rarely bring good news. Rosalind? The voice was barely a whisper, thick with tears. Who is this? It's Marcus. I sat up in bed, instantly awake. My son hadn't spoken to me since the day he was arrested in my destroyed living room. Marcus? What's wrong? Patricia's gone. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. Gone where? Dead. The word came out like he was choking on it. Car accident. She was drunk, Mom. Drove straight into a tree on Highway 9. I closed my eyes, feeling a complex mix of emotions I couldn't untangle. Relief that she couldn't hurt anyone else. Guilt for feeling relieved. Pity for the young woman who'd made such terrible choices. And unexpected sadness for Marcus, who'd lost his wife even if that wife had been his co-conspirator. When? 2 hours ago. I'm at the county morgue. I had to identify her body. His voice broke completely then, and I heard him sobbing, on the other end of the line. Despite everything they'd done to me, despite the months of legal battles and betrayal, he was still my son. Still the little boy who'd run to me with scraped knees and broken hearts. Marcus, where are you staying? Are you safe? I'm living in a studio apartment above Murphy's Tavern. Lost the house, lost everything else. The court ordered restitution. Cleaned us out. He laughed bitterly. Patricia couldn't handle it. The shame, the whispers, losing all her friends. She's been drinking for months. Why are you calling me? The question came out harsher than I'd intended, but I needed to know. Was this genuine grief or another manipulation? Because... He struggled with the words. Because you're my mother, and I don't have anyone else left. Because I finally understand what we did to you, and I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry, Mom. The apology I'd wanted to hear for months, and now it felt hollow. Death has a way of making everything complicated. Marcus, are you drinking? No. Well, not tonight. I was after Patricia, but I stopped. Had to. Couldn't afford to lose what little I have left. Through my bedroom window, I could see the construction lights illuminating our renovation work. Tomorrow, The final inspection was scheduled. In 3 weeks, Rosalind's Haven would officially open its doors to our first residents. The life I'd built from the ashes of their betrayal was about to become real. "I need to see you," Marcus said. "Face to face, I need to try to explain." Every instinct I'd developed over the past year screamed that this was a mistake. But Doris's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about the person who wronged you. It's about freeing yourself from carrying their poison. "All right, but not here. Meet me at Murphy's coffee shop tomorrow at 10. "Mom, thank you." After I hung up, I lay awake until dawn, thinking about the strange turns life takes. Patricia was dead. Marcus was broken. And I was about to open a facility dedicated to helping elderly people who'd been abandoned by their families. The irony was bitter and complete. Murphy's coffee shop sat on the corner of Main and 3rd, the kind of place that served coffee in heavy ceramic mugs and never changed their menu. I arrived early, choosing a booth in the back where we could talk without drawing attention. The morning crowd was thin. A few construction workers, some early commuters, an elderly man reading a newspaper at the counter. Marcus walked in at exactly 10 o'clock. I almost didn't recognize him. The confident, well-dressed attorney was gone, replaced by a thin, hollow-eyed man in clothes that hung loose on his diminished frame. His hair was gray at the temples now, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. He slid into the booth across from me, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for the coffee menu. "You look terrible," I said. "Feel the worse." He managed a weak smile. "You look good, though. Different. Stronger." "I am stronger. Had to be." The waitress came over. Lucy, who'd been working at Murphy's since before Marcus was born. She recognized him but didn't say anything beyond taking our order. Small-town discretion. After she left, Marcus stared down at his hands. "I don't know where to start." "Start with why." He looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time since he'd sat down. "Money. It always came back to money. My practice was struggling. Patricia's job at the bank was on shaky ground. We were living beyond our means. When Eleanor died and left, that inheritance, it seemed like a solution. So you decided to steal it. We told ourselves we were protecting you, that you were too old to manage that much money, that we could invest it better, take care of you." He laughed bitterly. "But that was bullshit, and deep down we knew it. We just wanted your money." "And the nursing home?" "Patricia's idea. She said once you were in care, we could manage your finances without interference. She made it sound reasonable, like we were doing you a favor." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I knew it was wrong, Mom. I knew it, but I went along with it anyway." "Why?" The question hung between us. Why does a successful man in his 40s decide to destroy his elderly mother for money? Why does love turn to greed? Why do families cannibalize each other over inheritance? "Because I was weak," Marcus said finally. "Because I let Patricia convince me that you wouldn't miss the money, that you'd be happier in care, that we deserved it more than you did. Because I stopped seeing you as my mother and started seeing you as an obstacle." The honesty was brutal and necessary. For months, I'd wondered if they'd ever understand the magnitude of what they'd done. Now I had my answer. "Patricia's death," I said carefully. "Was it really an accident?" Marcus's face crumpled. "I don't know. Maybe. She'd been talking about how she couldn't live with the shame, how everyone in town looked at her like she was garbage. She was drinking a bottle of wine every night, sometimes more. That night, we'd been fighting about money again. Whether to declare bankruptcy, whether to try to flee to another state. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. She stormed out. Got in her car. Next thing I know, the police are at my door. I tried to feel sorry for Patricia, but the well was dry. She'd made her choices, just like Marcus had made his. "What do you want from me, Marcus?" "I don't know. Forgiveness, maybe? A chance to be part of your life again? I know I don't deserve it, but—" He looked around the coffee shop, taking in the normal life happening around us. People chatting, reading newspapers, starting their ordinary days. "You're all the family I have left." The words that came out of my mouth surprised even me. "I forgive you." His eyes widened. "You do?" "I forgive you because carrying hatred is exhausting, and I have better things to do with my energy. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean trust." I leaned forward, letting him see the steel in my eyes. "You and Patricia tried to destroy me, Marcus. You put me in a nursing home against my will. You stole my money. You destroyed my house. You made me fight for my own life and dignity." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I survived because I was stronger than you thought. I'm building something good from what you tried to take from me. But you?" I shook my head. "You have to live with what you've done. Every day for the rest of your life, you have to wake up knowing you betrayed your own mother for money." "I know. Do you? Do you really understand that there are some lines you can't uncross? Some damage you can't undo?" "Yes." We sat in silence for a long moment. Around us, Murphy's continued its morning rhythm, the hiss of the coffee machine, the clink of dishes, the murmur of conversation. Normal life, continuing despite our drama. "I have to go," I said finally, standing up from the booth. "The facility opens in 3 weeks. I have 12 residents moving in, and they're counting on me." "Mom, wait." Marcus reached out as if to touch my arm, then pulled his hand back. Would it be possible for me to see what you've built? Just to understand what came out of what we destroyed?" I looked down at him, this broken man who used to be my son, and felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of closure. "Opening day is October 15th. There's a community celebration at 2 o'clock. You can come if you want. But Marcus?" I met his eyes one last time. "Come as a member of the community, not as my son. That relationship died the day you had me committed." Walked out of Murphy's coffee shop into the bright autumn morning, leaving Marcus sitting alone with his coffee and his regrets. Behind me, my past was finally buried. Ahead of me, Rosalind's Haven was waiting to open its doors. The fire started at 4:17 a.m. on the morning we were supposed to open. I woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of Doris screaming my name from down the hall. My bedroom was filled with an orange glow that had nothing to do with sunrise, and when I stumbled to the window, I saw flames licking at the windows of our beautiful new common room. "Rosalind!" Doris's voice was raw with terror. "Get out! Get out now!" I grabbed my robe and ran into the hallway, where smoke was already making it hard to see. The other women were there. Eleanor Vasquez, who'd moved in 2 days ago after her. Son stole her Social Security checks. Betty Morrison, whose daughter had abandoned her at a bus station, and Anna Chen, Doris's sister-in-law, who'd joined us just last week. "The front stairs," I shouted, but Eleanor was shaking her head, pointing toward the stairwell where black smoke was pouring upward like a deadly waterfall. "Backstairs!" Betty yelled. At 85, she moved faster than any of us, her walker clattering as she led us toward the rear of the house. The smell hit me as we reached the back stairwell, not just smoke, but something chemical. Gasoline, maybe, or kerosene, the kind of accelerant someone uses when they want a fire to spread fast and burn hot. We made it outside just as the fire department arrived, their sirens splitting the pre-dawn darkness. I stood on my back lawn, in my nightgown and bare feet, watching 2 years of work and dreams go up in flames, and I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't an accident. "Ma'am, is everyone accounted for?" A firefighter with soot-streaked cheeks was asking me questions. I could barely hear over the roar of water and flames. "Yes, everyone's out," I managed. Behind him, I could see neighbors gathering on the street, some in robes and slippers, others fully dressed as if they'd been expecting this. Fire Chief Danny Martinez, Judge Martinez's nephew, as it turned, out, approached me as the flames finally began to subside. Half the house was gone. The beautiful common room where we'd planned to hold activities was a blackened shell. The kitchen we'd spent months renovating was destroyed. My bedroom, where I'd slept safely for 3 years since returning from Sunny Meadows, was a pile of charred timber. "Mrs. Blackwood, I need to tell you something," Chief Martinez said quietly, leading me away from the others. "This fire was set. We found evidence of accelerant in 3 different locations. Someone wanted to make sure this place burned down." I wasn't surprised, but hearing it confirmed felt like a physical blow. "Any idea who?" "We're investigating. But I have to ask, do you have any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt your facility?" I almost laughed. Where to start? Patricia was dead, but she'd had months to plan something like this before her accident. Marcus was broken and desperate. Helen next door had already shown her true colors. Half the neighborhood had opposed our zoning variants. The list of people who wanted Rosalind's Haven to fail was longer than my arm. Chief Martinez, someone's been trying to destroy this project from the beginning. Could be anyone. As dawn broke over the smoking ruins of my life's work, I found myself thinking about cockroaches. Clarence used to say that cockroaches survive everything. Nuclear bombs, ice ages, even the worst intentions of human beings. They survive because they're adaptable, because they don't give up, and because they're tougher than they look. I was starting to understand how cockroaches felt. The investigation moved fast. By noon, Detective Morrison had arrested Helen Henderson for arson. Turned out my former friend had been more than just opposed to our facility. She'd been actively sabotaging us for months. The anonymous complaints to City Hall, the inspectors, sudden thoroughness, even some of the neighborhood opposition had been orchestrated by Helen and a small group of residents who saw our elderly residents as a threat to their property values. "She broke down during questioning," Detective Morrison told me as we stood in what used to be my kitchen. "Said she couldn't stand watching those people move into the neighborhood. Claimed it was bringing down the whole area. Those people. 5 elderly women who'd been abandoned by their families, trying to create a safe place to live out their remaining years with dignity. Those people who Helen had been happy to burn alive in their beds. Will she go to prison? Oh, yes. Arson's a felony, and since she endangered lives, she's looking at serious time." He kicked at a piece of charred debris. "Question is, what are you going to do now?" I looked around at the destruction. Again. This was the second time in 3 years that I'd stood in the ruins of my home, wondering how to rebuild from nothing. The insurance would cover some of it, but not all. The residents needed somewhere to go immediately. Our official opening was supposed to be in 6 hours, and instead of celebrating, I was standing in ashes. "Mrs. Blackwood?" Doris touched my arm gently. "The news people are here." Through the front windows, or what was left of them, I could see television trucks lining the street. Reporters with cameras and microphones, drawn by the story of the elderly women's shelter that someone had tried to burn down. "I don't want to talk to reporters." "Maybe you should," said a familiar voice behind me. I turned to see Margaret Sinclair, from the Community Foundation, her usually perfect silver hair disheveled and her clothes smudged with soot. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" "I heard about the fire on the scanner. Drove straight over." She looked around at the damage, her expression grim. "This is bad, Rosalind. Really bad. But it might also be an opportunity." "An opportunity?" "Half my house is gone." "Exactly. And every person watching the news tonight is going to see that someone tried to kill 5 elderly women rather than let them live in peace." Her eyes were bright with the kind of strategic thinking that had made her foundation successful. This isn't just about your facility anymore. This is about the larger problem of elder abuse and abandonment. Before I could respond, one of the ICE reporters had spotted me and was approaching with her cameraman in tow. "Mrs. Blackwood? I'm Jessica Chen from Channel 7 News. Can you tell us what happened here?" I started to shake my head, but then I caught sight of something that made me stop. Across the street, standing behind the crowd of neighbors and gawkers, was Marcus. He was wearing a wrinkled shirt and hadn't shaved, but he was there. He'd come, even after everything, even knowing he wouldn't be welcome. Our eyes met across the chaos, and I saw something in his face I hadn't seen in years. Not guilt or desperation or self-pity, but genuine concern. For me. For the women who'd almost died in the fire. For the dream that someone had tried to murder. "Mrs. Blackwood?" the reporter prompted. I looked back at her, then at the camera, then at the small group of women standing behind me. My chosen family, homeless again but still together, still fighting. "Someone burned down our home because they couldn't stand the idea of elderly women living with dignity," I said, my voice steady despite the exhaustion and shock. "They'd rather see us dead than see us happy." The reporter leaned in closer. "Who do you think was responsible?" "The police will determine that. But I can tell you this. Whoever did this underestimated us. They thought they could scare us into giving up, into disappearing quietly. They were wrong." "What will you do now?" I looked around at the ruins one more time, then back at the camera. "We'll rebuild. We'll find temporary housing for our residents. We'll continue our mission of providing safe, dignified housing for elderly people who've been abandoned by their families or can't afford traditional assisted living. Even after this, especially after this, because if someone was willing to commit arson to stop us, it means we were doing something that mattered, something that threatened the status quo, something worth fighting for." As the reporter wrapped up her interview, I felt a hand slip into mine. Doris, standing beside me, her face streaked with soot, but her eyes bright with determination. "So where do we go now?" she asked quietly. I squeezed her hand, thinking about cockroaches again, about survival, about the strange way that trying to destroy something sometimes makes it stronger. "I have an idea," I said. "But first, I need to talk to someone." I walked across the street to where Marcus was standing, leaving the reporters and officials behind. He looked surprised that I was approaching him, maybe afraid I was going to tell him to leave. "You came," I said. "I heard about the fire on the radio. I had to make sure you were okay. We're alive. Everything else can be fixed." He nodded, then surprised me by asking, "What can I do to help?" For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. This was the son who'd tried to have me committed, who'd stolen my money and destroyed my house. Now he was asking what he could do to help. Rebuild what someone else had tried to destroy? "You really want to help?" "Yes. I know I have no right to ask, but yes. Let me try to make something right for once." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-interest. But all I saw was a broken man who wanted to do something decent with what was left of his life. "All right," I said finally. "Here's what I need." What I needed, it turned out, was a miracle. And somehow, in the space of 72 hours, that's exactly what we got. Marcus started by making phone calls. Not the smooth lawyer-politician calls he used to make, but desperate, humble conversations, with every hotel, church, and community center in the county. By that evening, he'd found temporary housing for all 5 of us. Nothing fancy, but clean rooms with locks on the doors and dignity intact. "The Methodist Church has 2 rooms in their community house," he told me, as we stood in the parking lot of the Red Roof Inn, where Doris and I would be sharing a double. "Eleanor and Betty can stay there. Anna's niece in Millfield has a guest. Room she can use for a few weeks." "What about long-term?" He pulled out a legal pad covered with his handwriting, the first time I'd seen him take notes like that since his days as a young attorney, back when he still believed in justice. I've been making more calls. There are grants available for emergency housing after disasters. Federal money, state money, foundation money. We just have to know how to apply for it. We? The word slipped out before I could stop it, carrying more weight than I'd intended. Marcus caught it too, his face flushing slightly. If you'll let me help. I know I don't deserve the chance, but... He gestured toward the burned-out shell of what had been our home, visible in the distance. Someone tried to kill you and 4 other innocent women. I can't bring Patricia back or undo what we did to you, but maybe I can help you fight back against this. I wanted to say no. Every survival instinct I'd developed told me not to trust him, not to let him back into my life even as an ally. But, watching him work that day, making calls, taking notes, coordinating with the Red Cross and social services, I saw glimpses of the man he used to be. The idealistic young lawyer who'd wanted to help people before money and ambition corrupted him. All right, I said finally. But we do this my way. You're not in charge. You're not making decisions. And if you try to manipulate or control anything, you're out. Understood? Understood. The miracle started small. Margaret Sinclair called the next morning with news that 3 other foundations had pledged emergency funding after seeing the news coverage. Then Judge Martinez called to say she was organizing a community fundraising drive. Then Dr. Torres called to offer free counseling services for trauma recovery. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Blackwood, this is Tom Patterson. The voice on the phone was familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. I'm an attorney here in town. I represented you briefly some years ago. My old lawyer, the one Patricia had claimed was out of town during my commitment. Hearing, Mr. Patterson, yes, how are you? Embarrassed, frankly. I've been following your story in the news, and I realized I owe you an explanation. 3 years ago, when your family was pursuing guardianship, they contacted my office and told me you'd fired me as your attorney. They had what appeared to be a letter from you, terminating our relationship. Another forgery. Another lie in the web of deception Patricia and Marcus had woven around me. I should have called to verify, Patterson continued. Should have insisted on speaking to you directly. If I had, this whole nightmare might have been prevented. What's done is done, Mr. Patterson. Maybe. But what's not done is making it right. Mrs. Blackwood, I'd like to offer my services pro bono to help rebuild your facility. Legal work, regulatory compliance, insurance negotiations, whatever you need. By the end of the week, we had a team. Patterson handling legal issues, Margaret Sinclair coordinating foundation support, Judge Martinez cutting through city bureaucracy, and Marcus doing whatever grunt work needed doing. Research, phone calls, paperwork. Even Detective Morrison pitched in, using his contacts to expedite permits and inspections. The temporary solution came from Sarah Kim's law firm. They had an old Victorian house they'd been planning to renovate for office expansion. Instead, they offered to let us use it as transitional housing while we rebuilt the main facility. It's not perfect, Sarah admitted as she showed us through the dusty, outdated rooms. The kitchen needs work, and you'll have to share bathrooms. But it's structurally sound, and it's yours for as long as you need it. Standing in that empty house, surrounded by the women who'd become my family, and the unlikely team of allies who'd rallied to our cause, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Clarence died. Hope mixed with belonging, the sense that I wasn't facing the world alone. But the best surprise was yet to come. 2 weeks after the fire, as we were settling into our temporary home and beginning to plan the reconstruction, I got a call from someone I never expected to hear from. Mrs. Blackwood, this is Linda Martinez from Adult Protective Services. I have someone here who'd like to speak with you. The voice that came on the line was shaky but determined. Mrs. Blackwood, this is Evelyn Ross. I was at Sunny Meadows when you were there. just for one night, but I remember you. I vaguely recalled an elderly woman in the bed across from mine that terrible night. Quiet, frightened, with family members who spoke about her like she wasn't there. Evelyn, yes. How are you? I'm out of there. Finally got out. My grandson was stealing from me just like your son was stealing from you. But after I saw what you did, how you fought back, I got brave enough to call for help. I'm glad you're safe. That's not why I'm calling. Her voice got stronger, more determined. Mrs. Blackwood, I've been following your story in the news. What happened with the fire, how you're rebuilding. I want to help. That's very kind. But no, you don't understand. I'm 91 years old and I've got more money than I know what to do with. My late husband was in real estate, left me very comfortable, and I've got no family worth trusting. They proved that when they tried to warehouse me at Sunny Meadows. I sat down heavily, not sure where this conversation was headed. Mrs. Blackwood, I want to fund your facility. All of it. The reconstruction, the operating expenses, everything. I want to make sure what you're doing continues, and I want to be part of it. Evelyn, I don't know what to say. Say yes. Let an old woman who's been where you've been help make sure other old women don't have to go through what we went through. That evening, I called everyone together in the living room of our temporary home. Doris, Eleanor, Betty, Anna, and now, Evelyn, who'd moved in that afternoon with 2 suitcases and a checkbook that could change everything. Ladies, I said, looking around at these faces that had become more precious to me than any blood family I'd ever had. I think we need to talk about what we're really building here. A home, Doris said immediately. We're building a home. More than that, Betty added. We're building a place where people like us matter, where being old doesn't mean being thrown away. We're building proof, Anna said quietly, that families aren't just about who you're born to. They're about who chooses to love you. I nodded, feeling the truth of their words settle into my bones. Then we're not just rebuilding one facility. We're starting a movement. Through the window, I could see Marcus in the backyard, setting up folding chairs for a planning meeting with our volunteers. 3 years ago, he'd tried to destroy me. Now, he was literally building the foundation for something that could help thousands of elderly people across the country. Redemption, I was learning, was a complicated thing. It didn't erase the past or justify the harm that had been done. But sometimes, if you were very lucky, it gave you the chance to turn that harm into something healing. Tomorrow, we would start planning not just the reconstruction of Rosalind's Haven, but the creation of a network of similar facilities across the state, places where elderly people could live with dignity, protected from the predators who saw them as easy targets. Tonight, though, I sat with my chosen family in our temporary home, listening to them plan and dream and argue about paint colors and garden designs. Outside, autumn was settling over the town where I'd been born, raised my children, buried my husband, and learned that survival wasn't just about getting through the hard times. Sometimes, if you were very stubborn and very lucky, survival meant transforming those hard times into something beautiful. The money disappeared on a Tuesday. I was sitting at the kitchen table of our temporary house, going through the morning mail and sipping coffee that tasted like dishwater, when Sarah Kim called with news that made my stomach drop to the floor. Rosalind, we have a problem. The foundation account's been cleaned out. My hands started shaking so badly I had to set down my coffee cup. What do you mean, cleaned out? Someone with access to the account transferred everything out yesterday. Afternoon. All of it. The insurance settlement, the emergency grants, Evelyn's donation. Gone. $230,000. Everything we'd raised to rebuild, to start our network of facilities, to prove that what happened to us mattered. Gone. Who had access? Sarah's pause told me everything I needed to know before she said the words. The account required 2 signatures for major transactions, yours and Marcus's. I closed my eyes, feeling stupid and naive and ancient. Of course. Of course, Marcus had been playing a long game, earning back my trust just enough to position himself to steal everything one more time. The helpful son, the reformed man, the penitent sinner, all of it an act to get close to the money. Rosalind? Are you there? I'm here. My voice sounded hollow, even to my own ears. Where is he now? That's the other problem. His apartment's been cleaned out. Landlord says he left in the middle of the night, owing 2 months' rent. His car's gone, his phone's disconnected. Through the kitchen window, I could see Doris in the backyard, hanging laundry on the line we'd rigged between 2 trees. At 93, she still insisted on doing her share of the work, still believed that if we all pulled together, everything would work out fine. How was I going to tell her that we'd been betrayed again? How was I going to look Eleanor in the eye and explain that the son I'd trusted with our future had stolen it? How was I going to face Evelyn, who'd given us her life savings because she believed in what we were building? Sarah, please tell me there's something we can do. I've already called the FBI. Wire fraud across state lines is a federal crime. They're tracking the transfers, trying to figure out where the money went. She paused. But Rosalind, you need to know. The trail leads to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Even if we find him, getting the money back could take years. Years I didn't have. At 79, I was already running out of time to make this dream real. And the women counting on me, Doris with her arthritis getting worse every day, Eleanor whose memory was starting to slip, Betty whose heart condition meant she couldn't handle much more stress. They didn't have years either. After I hung up with Sarah, I sat at that kitchen table for a long time, staring at the stack of bills and permits and architectural plans. That suddenly seemed meaningless. 3 years ago, Marcus and Patricia had tried to destroy me by putting me in a nursing home. I'd fought back and won. Then someone had tried to burn us alive, and we'd survived and started to rebuild. Now Marcus had finished what he'd started, and this time there might not be any coming back from it. The sound of footsteps on the porch broke through my spiral of despair. The front door opened, and Evelyn came in carrying grocery bags, her face bright with the kind of optimism that comes from having a purpose again. Rosalind, dear, I got those paint samples you wanted for the new common room. I think the sage green will be perfect with the hardwood floors. She set down the bags and really looked at me for the first time. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Evelyn, sit down. Please. The next 10 minutes were the hardest of my life. Harder than telling my children their father was dead. Harder than standing in my destroyed house after the fire. Harder than facing Marcus and Patricia in that courtroom 3 years ago. Evelyn listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. How much? She asked finally. All of it, everything. Including my donation? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Evelyn stood up slowly, using her walker to steady herself. For a moment, I thought she was going to leave, pack her bags and get as far away from my catastrophic family drama as possible. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at Doris hanging laundry. That boy of yours, she said quietly. He's not very bright, is he? What do you mean? She turned back to me, and there was something in her expression I'd never seen before. Not the sweet, gentle old lady who'd moved in with us, but someone harder. Someone who'd survived 91 years by being tougher than people expected. He stole from me once before, 40 years ago, when he was fresh out of law school. I hired him to handle my husband's estate, and he skimmed money off the top. Thought I wouldn't notice because I was just some old widow who didn't understand finances. My mouth fell open. Marcus stole from you before? Oh, yes. I never pressed charges. Felt sorry for him, actually. Young man with student loans and a new wife, trying to make his way in the world. I thought maybe he'd learned his lesson when I quietly fired him and demanded restitution. But you still gave us money for the facility. Because I wanted to. See if he'd do it again. Wanted to see if a man who'd spent 3 years trying to rebuild his relationship with his mother would throw it all away for money. She smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Turns out a leopard really can't change its spots. I stared at her, trying to process what she was telling me. You knew he would steal from us? I suspected he might. That's why I kept detailed records of every transaction, every conversation, every promise he made. And that's why I made sure the FBI had a complete file on his previous theft before I ever wrote that first check. You set him up. I gave him a choice. He could have proven me wrong, could have shown that he'd really changed, that he was genuinely trying to make amends. She shrugged. He chose poorly. The front door opened again, and Detective Morrison walked in without knocking, the way he'd started doing since we'd all become something like family. Mrs. Blackwood, I just got off the phone with the FBI. They've got him. I felt like I was drowning in surprises. They found Marcus? Airport in Miami, trying to board a flight to Grand Cayman, had a fake passport and everything. Morrison's grin was grim and satisfied. Turns out your boy's been planning this for months. Had the offshore account set up, had the escape route mapped out. Problem is, when you steal from someone who's been tracking your every move and reporting to federal authorities, you don't get very far. Evelyn smiled sweetly. I may be 91 years old, Detective, but I didn't get to be 91 by being stupid. Ma'am, you definitely did not. He turned back to me. Mrs. Blackwood, they're freezing all the accounts he tried to transfer money to. You should have most of it back within a week. I looked between Detective Morrison and Evelyn, trying to understand how my world had gone from destroyed to saved in the space of an hour. You planned all this, I said to Evelyn, from the beginning. Not all of it. I really did want to help with your facility, but when Marcus offered to help handle the finances, she shook her head. Some people never learn. Some people will always choose the easy, dishonest path over doing the right thing. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to see it for yourself. Needed to know, once and for all, whether your son was someone you could trust or someone you needed to protect yourself from. Through the window, I could see Doris still hanging laundry, humming to herself as she worked. She had no idea that in the space of one morning, we'd lost everything and gotten it back. No idea that Marcus had tried to destroy us one final time, or that a 91-year-old woman had outsmarted him. What happens to Marcus now? Detective Morrison's expression was serious. Federal charges for wire fraud, theft, money laundering. He's looking at 10 to 15 years minimum. And since this is his second offense involving theft from elderly victims, he shrugged. Judge won't be inclined toward leniency. I should have felt vindicated. Should have felt relieved that Marcus would finally face real consequences for his actions. Instead, I just felt tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being betrayed, tired of having to be stronger and smarter and more suspicious than anyone should. Have to be at 79 years old? Rosalind? Evelyn's voice was gentle now, the steel hidden again beneath grandmotherly concern. Are you all right? I don't know. I looked around the kitchen of our temporary home, at the architectural plans, scattered across the table, at the coffee that had gone cold while my world fell apart and reassembled itself. I keep thinking this will get easier, that eventually people will stop trying to take advantage of us. But it never stops, does it? No, Evelyn said quietly. It doesn't. That's why we have to be smarter than they are, tougher than they expect. And that's why we have to stick together. Outside, Doris had finished hanging the laundry and was walking slowly back toward the house, her arthritis making each step careful and deliberate. In a few hours, she'd want to know why I looked like I'd been hit by a truck. Eleanor and Betty and Anna would ask questions. The volunteers would want updates on the reconstruction timeline. I could tell them the truth, that Marcus had tried to steal everything one more time, that Evelyn had caught him in an elaborate sting operation, that our money was safe and our project could continue. I could share the burden of this betrayal. Let them help me process the pain of being disappointed by my own son yet again. Or I could do what I'd been doing for 3 years now. I could be strong enough to carry this weight, smart enough to learn from it, and stubborn enough to keep building something good from the ruins of something terrible. "Ladies," I called out as Doris reached the back door. "We need to have a house meeting. There's been a development." 6 months later, I was standing in the brand new lobby of Rosalind's Haven, the real one this time, built from the ground up, watching 23 elderly residents argue about whether we should serve chocolate or vanilla cake at our grand opening celebration. "Chocolate's too rich for people with heart conditions," Betty Morrison was saying, waving her cane for emphasis. "Vanilla's safer." "Vanilla's boring," countered Eleanor Vasquez, who at 86 had developed strong opinions about everything since her memory started coming back. "We're celebrating, not attending a funeral." "Why not both?" suggested Anna Chen, who'd become our unofficial peacekeeper. "People can choose." I smiled, listening to their banter from behind the reception desk where I was pretending to organize paperwork. The truth was, I just liked being close enough to hear the sound of people who felt safe enough to argue about cake flavors. People who knew their opinions mattered, who felt comfortable taking up space, who weren't afraid their families would abandon them for being inconvenient. The new building was beautiful, nothing like the cramped institutional atmosphere of Sunny Meadows. We had a real kitchen where residents could cook their own meals if they wanted to. A library with books chosen by the people who'd actually be reading them. A workshop where Eleanor had started teaching woodworking to anyone interested. Gardens designed by and for people who'd be tending them. But the most important difference wasn't in the building itself. It was in the legal structure Evelyn and Sarah Kim had created. Rosalind's Haven wasn't just another assisted living facility. It was the first link in a network of resident-owned communities. People who lived here weren't customers or patients. They were members, with voting rights and decision-making power and protection from the kind of family predators who'd tried to destroy us. "Mrs. Blackwood?" The voice belonged to Jamie Martinez, our new administrator. She was Judge Martinez's daughter, fresh out of college with a degree in social work, and the kind of idealism that reminded me of myself 40 years ago. "The photographer from the State Journal is here for the opening coverage." I looked up from my fake paperwork to see a young man with expensive camera equipment setting up near the chocolate versus vanilla debate. Behind him, I could see more news vans pulling into our parking lot. The story had captured attention across the state. The elderly woman who'd been victimized by her own family and had turned that experience into a new model for elder care. "Should I gather everyone for a group photo?" Jamie asked. "In a minute." I stood up from the desk, my joints protesting after too many hours of sitting. At nearly 80, I was finally learning to pace myself. "I want to check on something first." I walked through the common room, past the residents debating dessert options, and out onto the back patio where we'd installed a memorial garden. 27 stone markers, each engraved with the name of an elderly person who'd died in substandard care or been victimized by family members. People whose stories had found their way to us through news reports, police files, and social services records. At the center of the garden was the largest stone, engraved simply, "For Patricia Matthews, lost to her own choices." I'd put it there not out of forgiveness exactly, but out of recognition. Patricia had been a victim too, in her way. A victim of her own greed and desperation, trapped in a marriage to a man who'd valued money over integrity and a society that taught women their worth was tied to their husband's success. That didn't excuse what she'd done to me, but it helped me understand how someone could make such terrible choices. I wondered if I'd find you here. I turned to see Evelyn approaching with her walker, moving more slowly than she had 6 months. Ego, but still determined to be independent. Her 92nd birthday was next week, and she'd announced she wanted to celebrate by learning to use the new computer system we'd installed for residents to stay in touch with family. The family Members who deserved contact anyway. Just thinking, I said. About what? About how different everything turned out from what I expected. I gestured toward the memorial garden, then back at the building full of laughter and argument and life. 3 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be running an assisted living facility, I'd have thought they were crazy. Life has a way of surprising us, Evelyn agreed. She settled carefully onto the bench beside Patricia's memorial stone. Any regrets? I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the 3 years of fighting, the legal battles, the betrayals, the fire, the constant struggle to build something new from nothing? No regrets about the fight, I said finally. But I do regret that it took so long for me to understand what I was really fighting for. Which was? Dignity. The right to make my own choices about how to live and how to die. The right to be seen as a whole person instead of just a problem to be managed or a bank account to be looted. Through the patio doors, I could see the photographer, setting up his equipment while residents continued their cake debate. In a few minutes, I'd go back inside and smile for the cameras and talk about our innovative approach to elder care. Tonight, there would be news stories about our grand opening, interviews with residents who'd found safety and community here. But the real story, the one that wouldn't make the evening news, was quieter. It was in the way Eleanor had started sleeping through the night without nightmares about her son stealing her Social Security checks. It was in how Betty had begun teaching cooking classes because she finally had a kitchen where she felt welcome. It was in Anna's daily phone calls to her sister in California, rebuilding a relationship that had been damaged by years of financial abuse. Evelyn, I said, can I ask you something? Of course. That first day you called me, when you said you wanted to help fund our facility. Was any of that true, or was it all part of your plan to catch Marcus? She was quiet for a moment, watching a cardinal land on one of the memorial stones. It was all true, she said finally. I really did want to help. Really did believe in what you were trying to build. The fact that it also gave me a chance to make sure Marcus faced consequences for his actions, that was just a bonus. And now? Are you happy with how it all worked out? Evelyn smiled, the expression transforming her face from elderly to ageless. Rosalind, I'm 92 years old. I've outlived 2 husbands, 3 of my 4 children, and most of my friends. I've been robbed by family members, abandoned in nursing homes, and written off as irrelevant by a society that thinks old age is a disease to be hidden away. She paused, looking around at the garden, the building, the life we'd built together. For the first time in 20 years, I wake up every morning knowing that my day will matter, that I have work to do, people who depend on me, a purpose that goes beyond just surviving until tomorrow. So yes, I'm happy with how it worked out. Mrs. Blackwood, Jamie's voice called from the patio doors. The photographer's ready for you. I stood up, brushing off my dress, the blue one I'd worn to court 3 years ago when I'd first fought back against Marcus and Patricia's attempt to steal my life. It still fit, though I'd had to take it in slightly. Stress and hard work had changed my body, but in ways that felt like strength rather than deterioration. Coming, I called back, then to Evelyn. Ready to be famous? At my age, why not? As we walked back toward the building, I caught sight of something that made me stop. Across the street, parked in the shadow of an oak tree, was a familiar figure. Marcus, sitting in what looked like a rental car, watching our grand opening. From a distance. He'd been released from federal prison 2 months ago after serving his sentence. Not the 10 to 15 years Detective Morrison had predicted. His lawyer had negotiated it down to 3 years, plus restitution and community service. But 3 years in federal prison had changed him. The reports I'd gotten through Sarah Kim described a broken man who'd lost everything. His law license, his house, his reputation, any chance of rebuilding his career. Now he was here, watching the success we'd built from the ashes of his betrayal. Part of me wanted to call the police, to have him removed from the property, We had restraining orders that technically prohibited him from coming within 500 feet of me or any of our facilities. But another part of me, the part that had raised him from birth, that remembered teaching him to ride a bike and helping him with homework and believing he'd grow up to be a good man, felt something closer to pity. "Should I call Detective Morrison?" Evelyn asked, following my gaze. "No," I said after a moment. "Let him watch. Let him see what we built without him. Let him understand what he threw away when he chose money over family." As we reached the patio, doors, I turned back for one last look. Marcus was still sitting in his car, staring at the building where his mother had created something meaningful from the ruins he'd helped create. Tomorrow, there would be news stories about our innovative approach to elder care. There would be inquiries from other communities wanting to replicate our model. There would be grants and partnerships and expansion plans. And Marcus would go back to whatever small apartment he was living in now, whatever minimum wage job he'd managed to find with his criminal record, whatever lonely existence he'd built from the wreckage of his choices. The irony was perfect. In trying to steal my future, he'd given me the most purposeful years of my life. In trying to warehouse me in a nursing home, he'd inspired me to revolutionize elder care. In trying to make me disappear, he'd made me more visible and influential than I'd ever imagined possible. "Mrs. Blackwood?" Jamie was holding the door open, smiling with the kind of patience that comes from working with elderly people who move at their own pace. "I'm ready," I said, and walked inside to face the cameras, surrounded by the family I'd chosen and the community we'd built together. The chest pain started during my speech at the state capitol. I was standing at the podium in the legislative hearing room, surrounded by lawmakers and advocates, explaining why we needed new regulations to protect elderly people from financial abuse. The room was packed: reporters, social workers, family members of victims, and even some residents from Rosalind's Haven who'd made the 2-hour drive to support the testimony. "Senators," I was saying, "when someone puts an elderly person in a nursing home against their will just to steal their money, that's not a family dispute. That's kidnapping and theft. And our laws need to reflect that reality." That's when the pressure hit my chest like someone had placed a concrete block on my ribs. Sharp, crushing pain that made it hard to breathe, let alone speak. The room started to tilt sideways, and I gripped the podium to keep from falling. "Mrs. Blackwood?" Senator Williams was rising from her chair, concern creasing her face. "Are you all right?" I tried to answer, but no words came out. Just a gasping sound that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. Through the buzzing in my ears, I could hear Doris calling my name from the gallery. The next few hours were a blur of ambulance sirens and hospital corridors, and doctors with serious faces asking questions I couldn't quite focus on. When I finally came back to full awareness, I was lying in a cardiac care unit with wires attached to my chest, and Sarah Kim sitting in the chair beside my bed. "How long have I been here?" My voice came out as a croak. 18 hours. You had what they're calling a cardiac event. Not quite a full heart attack, but close enough to scare the hell out of everyone. Sarah leaned forward, her usual professional composure cracked with worry. "Rosalind, when's the last time you took a real break? When's the last time you slept more than 5 hours a night?" I tried to think. Between running Rosalind's Haven, testifying at legislative hearings, consulting on 3 other facilities being built in different counties, and managing the constant stream of media interviews and speaking requests, I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a completely free day. "I'm fine," I said automatically. "Just overdid it a little." "You're not fine." The voice came from the doorway, where Dr. Patel, my new cardiologist apparently, was entering with a chart in his hands. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of serious expression that doctors develop when they have to deliver bad news. "Mrs. Blackwood, you've been running on adrenaline and determination for 4 years now. Your body is 80 years old and it's telling you to slow down. If you don't listen, the next cardiac event might not be so manageable." What are you saying? I'm saying you need to step back, reduce your stress, delegate responsibilities, take care of yourself for once instead of taking care of everyone else. He pulled up a chair and sat down, the way doctors do when they want to make sure you're really listening. How many hours a week are you working? I tried to calculate. Administrative duties at the facility, fundraising calls, legislative advocacy, media interviews, resident meetings, staff supervision. Maybe 60, 70? 80-year-old hearts aren't designed for 70-hour work weeks, Mrs. Blackwood. Something has to give. After Dr. Patel left, Sarah and I sat in silence for a while. Through the hospital window, I could see the parking lot where news vans had gathered. Word of my collapse had apparently made the evening news. The woman who'd fought back against elder abuse, felled by her own refusal to acknowledge her limits. The irony's not lost on me, I said finally. What irony? I spent 4 years fighting for the right of elderly people to make their own choices about their lives. Now everyone wants to make choices for me. I gestured toward the door where Dr. Patel had exited. Slow down, step back, take care of yourself. Sound familiar? Sarah's expression darkened. It's not the same thing, Rosalind. Dr. Patel isn't trying to steal your money or put you in a nursing home against your will. He's trying to keep you alive. Is he? Or is he just another person who thinks old age means stepping aside and letting younger people take over? The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but they reflected a fear I'd been carrying for months. All the speaking engagements, the consulting requests, the legislative testimony. Was it really about my expertise, or was I just a convenient symbol? The plucky old lady who'd fought back and won, useful for photo ops and inspiring stories, but not actually expected to do the real work? You want to know what I think? Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the news vans. I think you're terrified of slowing down because you're afraid people will forget about you. Afraid that if you're not constantly fighting and building and proving your worth, you'll become invisible again. The accusation hit harder than the chest pains had. That's not... It is, though. You've spent 4 years defining yourself by what you're fighting against instead of what you're fighting for. And now that you've won most of those battles, you don't know how to just live. Before I could respond, there was a knock on the door. Doris entered slowly, using her walker and moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints ache constantly. Behind her came Eleanor, Betty, and Anna, my chosen family, looking tired and worried and older than I'd noticed before. Well, Doris said, settling into the chair Sarah had vacated, you certainly know how to make an entrance. Collapsing during a legislative hearing? Very dramatic. I didn't collapse. I had a cardiac event. You collapsed, Betty said firmly. On statewide television, Eleanor missed her soap opera because they kept replaying it on the news. Eleanor patted my hand with fingers that felt increasingly fragile. Honey, we need to talk. Over the next hour, my friends told me some hard truths. That I'd been pushing myself too hard for too long. That they worried about me the way I worried about them. That the facility could run without me hovering over every decision. That maybe it was time to trust the systems we'd built and the people we'd trained. You taught us that being old doesn't mean being useless, Anna said quietly. But it also doesn't mean we have to work ourselves to death to prove our worth. The facility needs you, Doris added. But it needs you healthy and present, not burned out and collapsed on podiums. That evening, after my friends had left and the news vans had moved on to other stories, I lay in my hospital bed thinking about something Clarence used to say. He believed that the hardest thing about getting older wasn't the physical decline or the loss of independence. It was learning when to hold on and when to let go. I'd spent 4 years learning how to hold on, to fight for my rights, to build something meaningful, to refuse to be discarded or forgotten. Maybe it was time to learn the other lesson. Not giving up or stepping aside, but trusting others to carry forward what we'd started together. My phone buzzed with a text message. Jamie Martinez, our administrator. Mrs. B saw the news. The facility is running fine. Residents are worried. About you, not about operations. Focus on getting better. We've got this. Another message from Margaret Sinclair at the Community Foundation. Take all the time you need to recover. The movement you started is bigger than any one person now, even you. And a third, from someone I hadn't expected to hear from. Mom, saw the news. I know I have no right, but I'm worried about you. Marcus. I stared at that last message for a long time. Marcus, who'd tried to destroy me multiple times, who'd stolen from me and betrayed my trust repeatedly, was worried about my health. The irony was so complex I couldn't untangle all the threads. But maybe that was the point. Maybe relationships, even damaged ones, were too complicated for simple categories like victim and villain, forgiveness and revenge. Maybe the real work wasn't in fighting the people who'd hurt me, but in building something good enough that their harm couldn't destroy it. Dr. Patel had said I needed to step back, reduce stress, delegate responsibilities. My friends had said the facility could run without me hovering over every decision. The news reports would move on to other stories, other symbols, other battles. For the first time in 4 years, I was facing a future that wasn't defined by what I was fighting against. The question was, what did I want to fight for instead? Outside my hospital window, the sun was setting over the city where I'd been born, raised my children, buried my husband, and learned that survival sometimes meant becoming someone entirely different from who you thought you were. Tomorrow, I would start figuring out who that someone was supposed to be next. 1 year later, I was sitting in my garden at Rosalind's Haven, watching my great-niece teach origami to a group of residents, when Marcus walked up the path. I'd been expecting him. Sarah Kim had called that morning to let me know he'd been released from his community service requirement and that his restraining order had been modified to allow supervised visits. What I hadn't expected was how different he looked. Prison and the year of community service had aged him in ways that went beyond gray hair and deeper lines around his eyes. He moved differently now, slower, more carefully, like someone who'd learned that the ground beneath his feet wasn't as solid as he'd always assumed. "Hello, Mom." Marcus. I didn't get up from my bench, didn't invite him to sit. After 5 years of betrayals and legal battles and rebuilding from ashes, I'd earned the right to make him work for even basic civility. You look good, healthy, better. Then when I collapsed giving testimony about elder abuse laws, the words came out sharper than I'd planned, but I wasn't going to pretend this was a normal family visit. He winced. "I heard about that. The heart problems. I wanted to visit you in the hospital, but you were in federal prison for stealing from elderly women." Yes, that would have complicated things. We sat in silence for a while, watching the origami lesson. My great-niece Lucy, my sister Eleanor's granddaughter, had started volunteering here after graduating college. She was 23, bright and idealistic, with the kind of energy that made our elderly residents feel connected to the wider world instead of forgotten by it. "She looks like Eleanor did at that age," Marcus said, following my gaze. "She acts like her too. Eleanor would have loved this place. She would have been proud of what you built." I turned to look at him directly for the first time since he'd arrived. "Are you here to apologize again? Because I've heard enough apologies from you to last a lifetime." "No." "Well, yes, but not just that." He pulled a folded envelope from his jacket pocket. "I wanted to give you this." Inside the envelope was a cashier's check for $50,000. "What is this?" "Restitution. The courts ordered me to pay back what I stole, with interest. I've been working construction, living in a studio apartment, saving every penny I could." He paused, looking down at his hands that were now calloused from manual labor instead of soft from pushing papers. "It's not everything I took from you." Not even close. But it's what I've been able to save over the past 2 years. I stared at the check. $50,000 was real money. Money that could fund improvements to the facility or help us expand our services. But it was also something else. Proof that Marcus had spent 2 years of his life working to undo some small portion of the damage he'd caused. Why now? Because I finally understand what I really stole from you. He looked around the garden, taking in the residents engaged in their activities, the staff members who treated everyone with dignity and respect, the sense of community that permeated everything we'd built. It wasn't just money, it was time. Years of your life that you had to spend fighting me instead of living however you wanted to live. And now you think $50,000 buys back those years? No, nothing can buy them back. But maybe, he struggled with the words, maybe it can help you have better years going forward. Before I could respond, Doris appeared on the path, walking slowly with her walker, but moving with purpose. At age 94, she'd become the unofficial grandmother of our facility, the one everyone turned to for advice or comfort, or just someone to listen. Rosalind, dear, are you all right? You looked like you might need backup. She eyed Marcus with the kind of suspicion that came from years of watching families betray their elderly relatives. I'm fine, Doris. This is Marcus, my son. Ah. Doris settled her walker and studied Marcus with sharp eyes. The thief. Marcus flinched but didn't defend himself. Yes, ma'am, the thief. Good. At least you're honest about it now. She turned to me. Should I stay? It's all right. We're just finishing up. After Doris left, slowly, but with obvious reluctance, Marcus and I continued sitting in uncomfortable silence. The origami lesson was winding down, and I could hear the dinner preparations beginning in the kitchen. Normal sounds of people living normal lives, unaware of the complicated family drama playing out on the garden bench. I know you probably won't believe this, Marcus said finally, but I'm glad you survived what I did to you. Glad you fought back. Glad you built all this. Because it eases your guilt? Because you deserved better. You always deserved better than what Patricia and I put you through. He stood up slowly, and I noticed he favored his left leg. An injury from his construction work, maybe, or just the accumulated wear of a man in his 50s whose life had taken a hard turn. Marcus, I called as he started to walk away. The money. I'll take it, but not for me. He turned back, hope flickering in his eyes. We're starting a legal aid fund to help elderly people who can't afford attorneys when their families try to abuse them, people who don't have the resources to fight back the way I did. I folded the check and put it in my pocket. Your restitution will help other people survive what you put me through. The hope in his expression faded, replaced by something more complex. Understanding, maybe, or acceptance. That's perfect, actually. Thank you. After he left, I sat in the garden until the sun began to set, thinking about the strange turns life takes. 5 years ago, Marcus had tried to have me declared incompetent and locked away in a nursing home. Now I was living in a facility I'd designed myself, surrounded by people I'd chosen as family, using money he'd paid in restitution to help other elderly people fight the same battles I'd fought. The irony was so complete it was almost beautiful. Rosalind? Lucy appeared on the path, her arms full of colorful paper cranes from the origami lesson. Dinner's ready. Eleanor made her famous pot roast. I looked around the garden one more time, at the memorial stones honoring victims of elder abuse, at the fruit trees we'd planted in memory of loved ones, at the benches where residents could sit and remember or plan or simply exist without having to justify their presence. This was what I'd been fighting for all along, though I hadn't known it at the time. Not just the right to make my own choices about how to live, but the chance to create a place where other people could make those choices too. A place where being old didn't mean being invisible, where having no family didn't mean having no one, where surviving abuse meant more than just surviving. It meant healing. Coming, I called to Lucy, and stood up from the bench where I'd been sitting with my son, my stranger son, my reformed son, my son who'd finally learned the difference between taking and giving back. As I walked toward the building full of voices and laughter and the ordinary sounds of people who felt safe enough to call somewhere home, I realized something that would have surprised me 5 years ago. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Marcus, not at Patricia's memory, not at the system that had failed to protect me, not even at myself for taking so long to learn how to fight back. The anger had been fuel when I'd needed fuel. But what I needed now was different. Peace. Purpose. The quiet satisfaction that comes from building something good from something terrible. Behind me, the garden held its memorial stones and fruit trees and benches in the gathering dusk. Tomorrow there would be more origami lessons and pot roast dinners and residents arguing about cake flavors and all the small, precious routines of people who'd found their way home after being lost. Tonight, though, I would sit at the dinner table with my chosen family and listen to their stories and share my own, grateful for every ordinary moment in this extraordinary life I'd accidentally built from the ruins of my old one. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe. And turn on notifications.